on this one. Okay, we're talking about building a references page today. I got a few of the papers done, so about half of the class, so I'll get the other class, half of the class next time. But I've got those papers to return to you at the end of class today. It went really quickly because a lot of people did really well. Right? That's a good sign. So you're making progress. That's good. Well, just keep it up. Just also recognize that paper 3 was, that's kind of an easy assignment, right? This next one's hard. I expected you to do better on that one. Now you got to keep it up, right? So, all right. The references page, as I said before, is a vitally important component to writing a research paper, right? You cannot write a research paper without playing by the rules. So, we need to start with the rules. And some of the basic rules for developing a references page are right here on page 42 in the book. Now, this is just a general application of the rules. You should be looking up specifics in various components and various elements of the textbook to address certain specificities in your references and your sources that you're pulling out, right? So there'll be examples of how to do different types of journals and different types of books. All of that information is available to you through those pages. What you need to be able to do, though, just so you have an understanding, is that if I come to you with your references page and say, you need to explain what you did here, right? That when I say that, that means you need to be able to tell me, this is the rule that I followed, or this is the example that I used to help me make that decision, right? If you just stare at me blankly and go, I don't know, right? Then that means you're a fraud, right? You just make stuff up. You can't make stuff up. You have to be able to play by the rules and know where the rules are. So if you're just throwing down elements into a references page because you think it should be there, right? Well, that tells me you're probably going to be a bad practitioner too, because you're going to start writing prescriptions for people who don't need them. Or you're going to write the wrong prescription for somebody and kill them, right? So rules are rules. We have those for a reason, right? So we need to make sure that you're following them. So let's take a look at this introductory section of the references page and have a conversation about the different things that are here. Obviously, most of your source material will be derived from journals. The difference between a print journal and an online journal is the fact that a print journal means that you actually have your hands on the physical journal itself. It means you went into the stacks, you pulled that magazine or journal off the shelves, and you read it. Right? That's what a print journal means. What we probably will be using most are those journals that appear in an online format. But that raises a few problems, right? It's not a database, even though we call those databases. And the AMA actually gives you examples of how to do databases. We'll talk about that. Actually, let's talk about it right now. There's no entry for a database up here, right? So what you should recognize is that for those databases that you use, if you're using a database, and probably the only one that you will use would be Dynamed. So if you're using Dynamed, what I suggest that you do is whatever page you're on in Dynamed, you scroll to the bottom, and at the bottom of that Dynamed page, they give you an NLM format. In other words, a National Library of Medicine format, which is what the AMA uses. They will actually write the format for you in the database form, and you can just copy and paste that into your references page. That is the only time that I will instruct you to do that, to copy and paste someone else's reference. Only for Dynamed, because I know that Dynamed's entries follow the NLM format. Nobody else can be trusted, right? Because everybody else who does it, I would say 90% of those entries that I see listed at the back of a journal or at the bottom of the page or something are not accurate. So you need to go through and produce your own entries to make sure that you don't make a mistake. So databases If you're using Dynamed, go to the bottom of the page, you've got that covered. All the rest of them are going to be through these types of forms. And as I said, print and online, they're the same in terms of their presentation in the references page. It's just one's going to be found in a different place. So let's go through and talk about what has to happen and why these are different. First of all, you need to know how to produce authors, right? So if you're on 42, you can flip over to 43 and 44, and you can see they explain to you how to do one author, how to do two authors, how to do six authors, more than six authors, authors in a group, etc. Right? They give you a whole bunch of examples. Now, I'm telling you this because there's an important difference between how authors are presented in the references page versus how they're presented in the text. When you're writing about authors, right, and the references page, as you can see here, they tell you you can go right up to 6 names in the references page. Anything beyond 6, you're going to do the first 3 authors and then et al. Okay? So that's how that's going to work. Making sure I'm correct on that. More than 6 authors, yep. More than 6 authors, you do the first 3, and then et al. But when you're writing about authors in text, and that's what this bit down here is about, right? The reason why they put this together in the textbook, right, is they want you to know that there's a difference in how they're presented in the text. When you have one author and you're talking about the text, you just use that last name. If you have 2 authors, then you use both names. But if you have more than 2 authors, then you put do et al. Right? Notice that's different than the references page. The references page makes you write up to 6. But in text, you just write up to 2. So you need to know how to do that differently, right? There are rules, and you need to play by the rules. All right. So back to our presentation of the source. So you need to know how to do authors. And as you can tell, let me just go back to that quickly. All right, when you produce author names, notice that there are no marks of punctuation. Right? The only thing that we would use as a punctuation would be a comma to separate the 2 entries. We don't write out names. We use abbreviations for their initials, right? And we don't do any marks of punctuation between the last name and the initials. The only marks of punctuation we use are in between the authors and at the end to signal that that entry is ended. That part of the entry is done, right? If you don't follow the rules, I'm not reading your paper. Pretty simple, right? All you got to do is just look this stuff up. So, back to the other issues. In addition to knowing how to produce your authors, you also have to know how to produce titles of your article, right? So, you should be aware of the fact that every article title is written in sentence-style capitalization, meaning that the first word is capitalized and nothing else is capitalized unless it's a proper noun. All right? There's no quotation marks around that title. There's no italicization of that title. It just looks like a sentence. Okay? Sentence style capitalization. Plain text. Journal names, however, are different. They are capitalized. They are italicized. But one thing that's not represented here is that journal names are abbreviated. So how do you know how to abbreviate a journal? If you go back to page 473 in the textbook, you will find a list about 20 pages long. Oh, maybe it wasn't that. 10 pages of all the journals that the AMA recognizes in their abbreviations. So if you find your journal is in there, you can just use the abbreviation that they provide for you. However, right, so the American Heart Journal is AmHeartJ. American Family Physician, AmFam Physician. Right? That's how you would find your abbreviations. You will find that the AMA list of journal abbreviations is not encompass every article, every journal that's written. Therefore, if your journal doesn't appear in this list, you're going to have to make up your own abbreviation. That begins on page 479. At the bottom of 479, they give you some instructions on how to do it. You already know that everything is italicized and capitalized. And now they give you about 25 pages of words that need to be used to abbreviate. Okay, so your title, right, you're going to look up each individual word in your title and use their abbreviations. Now, when you write your actual abbreviation for your journal, notice what it says up here, that you omit things like articles, conjunctions, prepositions, punctuation, diacritical marks, right? All of those things come out. So words like a, an, and the, those are articles. Prepositions, of, on, over, below, before, all those words are eliminated. So the only thing you're actually producing are nouns. If you look at this list, it's 25 pages of nouns. So that's what they want, is your abbreviation. If your word does not appear in that list, then you write it out in its entirety. Yep. 479. All right, so 473 is where the journals are. 479 is where the words are. So you need to know how to produce your journals in accordance with the AMA rules. Any questions about that? Okay. AMA is also unique in how they produce the bibliographic information. They have a specific rule, right? First of all, the rule for punctuation is that for every mark of punctuation that appears in your text, there's only one space after it. So if you type a period, you hit the space bar once, and that's twice. Whether it's in the references page or whether it's in the document itself, it doesn't matter. It's only one space after the period. And it's the same thing with punctuation like commas and colons and semicolons. There's only one space after the marks of punctuation, except in this bibliographic string. Right? Notice that there are no spaces between these elements and the punctuation. So your year is separated from the volume with a semicolon. Now, most journals, if not all of them, have volumes. But the issue number or the series number, right? Not every journal is going to have that. Sometimes they just use words like seasons, right? Spring, fall, winter, they put those in there. Sometimes they just don't have series numbers at all. They just have volume numbers. So that's okay. Just if it doesn't have it, just don't put the issue number there. Just go right to the colon and then the pages that the article appears on. Right? Page 79 to 88. And then you get your period in there. You get to end that. So whether you're doing a print version or an electronic version, they're both the same up until this point. After this point, now you've got some other information to add if you have an online version. In other words, you're looking at an article in our databases like PubMed, Medline, ScienceDirect, all those things that we use, right? When you're using all those databases, right, they're going to ask you for a URL. And you're going to find there's this great big long daemon.edu server proxy dot whatever, right? That is not a live link. You are not using links that aren't live, right? It doesn't make any sense to put a link, to put a URL in there that's 3 lines long if it doesn't take me anywhere, right? Because if I click on that link, or if I type that link in, guess where it's going to take me? To the front page of the Daemen College Library where it says, please sign in, right? It doesn't give me the article. There's no sense in putting a URL in your paper if it's not live. Understand? Right? So you need to make sure that that URL is live or not. If it's live, you can use it. If it's not live, we've got other options. The most important of those options is the DOI or the PMID. So I need you to take a stroll with me over to page 65. On 65, they talk about the DOI and the PMID numbers. Right? Now, PMID is pertinent to PubMed. Right? DOI is essentially in every other type of database that's out there. Right? But they tell you right here, look, they would rather have the DOI than the URL. The URL is lengthy and often not live. The DOI, I don't even have to be in the right database. And if I type in the DOI, I'll still get the article. You have a problem if you tell me that your article is located someplace, and if I follow your directions and I don't get that article, guess what? I'm coming to talk to you, right? Because you just told me that something was available and now it's not. The DOI is error-proof, right? That has, it always works. URLs, they're a problem. So use a DOI if you've got them. Take the URLs out and replace it with a DOI. And they give you an example of how to do it, right? So here's your authors. Sorry. Your authors and your titles and all of those kind of things, right? Here's the database, Cochrane database, with your bibliographic string. And then look, it's a period, then lowercase DOI, and then a big long number. That's it. I type that number in, I get your article. So DOI is king. You'd want the DOI first if you've got it. Question?
So will your database like show you?
Yep. It usually is written right on the article somewhere, right? And if it's not written on the article, sometimes it's written on the bibliographic page on the front end of your journal, right before, like they'll give you a page that gives you all the bibliographic information, and then you have to click on like the PDF or the web link in order to get to the actual article, right? So a lot of times the DOI is there. Not an extension number, right? And none of those other numbers, right? That stuff, I want DOI and PMIDs. Those other numbers don't count. Those are just library categorization numbers, all right? DOIs and PMIDs. That's what you want. So that gives you an example on how to do that. Now, if you have a situation, and this could happen, and it has happened, if you have a situation where you don't have a DOI or PMID, and your URL is not live, then you are left with only one other option, and that is something that I'm going to tell you to do that's not in the book, and that is you will just write the database name and the access date, right? Just tell me what database it came from, like PubMed or Science Direct or something. Just write that database name, and then put your access date. So at least I'll just go to the database then, and I'll just type in your title. I'll bring it up that way. If you get my drift in any of this, right, I have to be able to access the materials that you're using for your evaluation. If I can't get where you are, then you've got a problem, right? You're not doing your job. Yes?
You said don't put the URL if it's not active.
Yep.
So we have to be in, like, sign into my daemon, so would we be able to use it then? Like, should we put the URL?
No, because you're not writing for people only at Daemen College.
Okay.
Yeah. That's why I'm saying it's 99% of the time that URL is not going to be live. Now, there are places that do have journals in electronic formats, right, that do put them in URLs, like American Heart Association will put journals on their website, right, which are available. So if you go to Google Scholar or something like that, you will find URLs that actually have, they're live. So, I mean, that's a possibility that it could be live. I'm just saying, if you're inside the Daemen databases, you're not using the URL. As soon as you see that word proxy in there, that means that you have to go through firewall in order to get into it. So that's why it doesn't work. Okay, so do you understand the three phases of thinking that you have to go through in order to present your online journal? Right? You either have a URL, 99% of the time it's probably not going to work. Right? DOI is king, that's what you want to do, but if the DOI is not available or the URL is not live, then you go and just write the database name and the access date. Okay? If you use a URL, you also have to have that access date in there as well. Now, there are some other dates that you're going to find on some of these pages, and especially in electronic forms, and you should pay attention to those. Things like publication dates, in other words, what date the article actually went up on the website or on the the electronic form, and then there's update dates, right, which tell me that the article changed at this particular time. So if you give me some information and you don't give me the update date, and I go to that website and I find that the information that I'm looking for that you're talking about isn't there, Well, you can say, well, I can look at your entry and I can say, all right, her access date was this and the update date was after. So obviously when they updated the website, they changed things. That's the reason why I can't find it. Right? So update dates and access dates are important because I need to be able to get to where you are. If I can't get there, you've got a problem. Any other questions about this? Okay. Now, books. A lot of times, right, you're thinking to yourself, well, books, you know, what, online books? We have a lot of online books, right? If I would tell you Access Medicine is probably, you know, the best collection that we have of electronic books. So if you're getting some general information, right, usually we use books for that general basic information, right, stuff that's not even really arguing our point because it's so dated, right? I mean, so we would only use books for just really background information. But if we want to use a book, we have to recognize that there are format differences. Authors are the same, right? You just, whatever you do for authors, that appears the same way no matter what type of entry you use. But a book title, as you can see here, capitalized and italicized. That's important. If it has an edition number, meaning if there's a 2 or higher number after it, nobody writes 1 for the first edition, right? They just put the title there. If they redo the book, like my book is now in its 2nd edition, right? So as you can see there at the bottom of the page, 2nd edition, right? So this is the 2nd time this book has been published because we've made changes to it. So the edition number is important. So whatever edition you got there, city, state, country, the publisher, that information is in the back of the book. So under abbreviations for titles of cities and states and those kind of things, that's all back in around page 500, right? So you can look up those, the publisher's name, the copyright year, and then obviously there's a URL again that's not live. Then you're just going to have to tell me Access Medicine and database because the URL is not going to be live if you're using it from our databases. Okay? And they give you some other information down here too on how to do websites, and the information for databases is back here on page 70, right? So you can see how the databases, this is the reason why we don't use this form for when we're finding journal articles, because these aren't databases like they think of a database, right? They're thinking of a database as if it's a place that houses a bunch of numbers and information, right? Not a place that houses published articles. So we call our library a database, but it's not really an accurate term. So don't use databases unless you're using Dynamed, right? So that's the only form you're going to use for Dynamed. And as I told you, you can copy and paste that right off the bottom of the page that you're on. Okay? So that's on page 70. All right. What I did in the textbook was I tried to present for you in an abbreviated form of the AMA book. And I'm just telling you this is here just for the purpose of just understanding some things. Don't use the textbook. I'm on page 248 in the textbook. Don't use the textbook to write your references, but you can use this to kind of just do a quick check to make sure that you're on the right page, right? When you're reading this 248 all the way over here, you know, it gives you like how to do a references page and all those kind of things. It gives you some of that on 250, 252, all right? So they'll tell you a little bit of that information, but you know, where I want to start for today's conversation is over here on 255. I want to look at an exercise, and I told you we would do some exercises, right? I want to look at an exercise on how to build the references page on our own. So what I want you to do is I want you to take a look at this up here. I want you to do a couple things. Number one, I want you to figure out what this is, right? So you have to look at that thing and you have to determine, all right, well, is this a database? Is this online journal? Is this print journal? Is this book, right? You have to be able to figure out what it is. Once you figure out what it is, then I want you to go to this book and I want you to start looking up the rules for how you would produce this, right? So we know that there's a basic format that we just covered on page 42, but that's not going to be your guide because that's just a general format. what you're going to need to do is go to the specific formats and figure out, hey, how do I do titles in this case? Or how do I do something that, that's American Physical Therapy Association, doesn't have maybe some other information. You're going to need to go and find some examples because, as I said, there's two explanations that you're going to use for me. If I come around and I point to something on your page, I'm going to say, why'd you do that? You're going to say, I went to this rule on this page, and I followed the book because I interpreted it this way. Or you're going to say, I went to this example on this page because the example showed me what I thought was what I had in my possession. Okay? Let me give you a general rule to operate by with this exercise. And with whatever you do with your references page. Do not write anything unless the book tells you to do it. If you follow that simple principle, you'll be okay. I can understand if you misinterpret something, right? If you fail to identify something because of what it is, you're confused about what kind of source it is or what kind of information is being presented to you, I can work with you on that. But I can't work with somebody who's just cheating, right? Someone who's just making up information and putting it in the wrong places. So, don't do anything unless the book tells you to do it. If the book tells you to do it, then you're set. Okay, let's see what you can do. By the way, I changed my office today. My office is now in 200 in this same suite and just facing the parking lot. Move across the carpet. So what's number one? Online journal? There's a journal name up there? Yeah, just a website. All right, why are websites problematic? Why would we want to avoid websites at all costs? They're not what? They're not reliable, right? Because anybody with $2.99 and the ability to fill out a form can have one, right? That's the reason why we have problems on the internet. Like there's child pornography and bomb making instructions and those kind of things out there, right? Because $2.99 and the ability to fill out a form is the only prerequisite that you need in order to build a website. So let's go back to our information literacy conversation that we had before, right? If you know that there's kooks out there who are putting information up that is wrong or just misguided or inaccurate, why would we want to put ourselves into the pool of kooks where that information exists, right? Publication helps us defend against the kooks, right? Told you before, you're not going to listen to the guy in Top's parking lot who's telling you if the world's going to end tomorrow, right? He's not a reliable source. The internet is not a reliable source either, right? So you're going to avoid places like .com and .edu, right? .edu, they're some of the worst places to get information from. And you're thinking to yourself, well, those are colleges and educational institutions. I don't care, right? If it's not published, you understand the difference between publishing and posting something? I mean, I can put whatever I want on a website. I don't have anybody filtering that. No one is telling me that my information is good or bad. But if I publish something, it has to go through a series of editorial processes where a bunch of professionals in the field dictate whether my information is acceptable or not to the profession. Like my textbook, right? I didn't just wake up one day and type out a bunch of words and then have somebody paste it together and make it look like a book, right? First thing I had to do is I had to write a letter to the company and say, look, I've got an idea for a textbook. Their acquisitions editor contacts me back and says, okay, I like the idea, let's see a sample. So I send them a sample chapter. They look at that sample chapter, they think to themselves, okay, if this is something that's representative of the entire book, we want to see the entire manuscript. So then I send them the entire manuscript. And the acquisitions editor then gives that entire manuscript to in-house editors, right? A group of people, probably 3 or 4, room for every publishing company that's out there, who review the book and decide, hey, this is something that we want to pursue. It still doesn't go to publication, right? Because at that point, they'll send me a letter back and say, okay, we're going to accept this for publication, depending on how it's reviewed by the general public, meaning that the people in the profession. So this is where I come in, right? I get a lot of people who, publishing companies will send me a document and ask me to review it. I write my little review. Remember when you had to write book reviews in 6th grade or whatever, right? Yeah, well, that's the same kind of thing that I do, right? I read these people's works, and then I write what I think are the strengths and weaknesses, and whether I think that book should be accepted into publication or not. So there's usually about 3 or 4 people who are outside editors, right? So there's inside editors and there's outside editors that go through the process of figuring out whether the textbook should be accepted or not. And if those 3 or 4 people decide that it's okay, then the book goes to the actual copy editor who makes sure that all the periods and punctuation are right and all the words make sense and all that kind of stuff. And then the book finally goes to press. There are a series of eyes and evaluations that go into publication that just don't happen on a website, right? A website is just anybody with an idea can put their ideas out there. .edus are a problem because you get a lot of people who go through that process. They write that manuscript. They put it out there to those publishers, and guess what? People like me reject them, right? Tell them that their work is worthless, right? I have to write that letter a lot of times. But, right, it's because we hold the standard. So when we reject something, a lot of those professors out there, right, who are kooks, you know that, right? There's kooks everywhere, not just here, they're everywhere, right? In every profession. A lot of those people look around and go, well, I put so much effort into writing this manuscript, somebody ought to read it. Off it goes onto their website, right? So they work at an educational institution, and next thing you know, there's some guy out there with a PhD, and there's an electronic book or a manuscript or something that's associated with his name in an EDU website. It has gone through no peer review, no editorial process, but yet there it is. It looks like a published document from a professional at an educational institution. It is not reliable because it hasn't been reviewed. That's why the peer review process is so important, right? I mean, and look, there's vanity presses out there too, right? There's people, they'll take $500 from you. If you want to type up a manuscript and give somebody $500, they'll paste it together and make it look like a book for you. It doesn't make it a book, right? It doesn't mean it's peer reviewed. It doesn't mean there's worth anything. It's just a bunch of paper taped together to make it look like a book. I was at a conference in South Carolina a couple years ago, and I was walking through the lobby, and I see a bunch of my colleagues were gathered around this little fire with some guy who was telling stories. Of course, I'm trying to get through the lobby without anybody seeing me, right? And sure enough, someone goes, hey, you gotta come on over here, you need to listen to this guy. And I'm like, oh. So I go over there, and this guy's telling stories, and he had a really exciting story to tell. He was an orphan in Australia and ended up on a boat going to Guam or something and got blown up in World War II and swam ashore, ended up in East Asia for a bunch of years, and then finally made it to the United States. And this guy's got this incredible story to tell. You know what I'm talking about? Oh, you're kind of smiling. I thought maybe you know. Well, anyway, so this guy's telling this big story out there, and I'm just thinking the whole time going, why am I listening to this, right? And someone says, well, you know, because the guy was pretty entertaining, he was an engaging speaker, and someone says, if you go talk about this, do you ever think about writing? And of course, here it comes, right? He's like, well, yeah, I wrote a book. Of course, I roll my eyes, and I'm thinking to myself, all right, so you wrote a book, right? And then he says, the kicker, right? I've got a bunch of copies in the trunk of my car. Let me go get some, right? Nobody who publishes books for a living carries around their work in the back of their car, right? You have a marketing team that does that for you, right? You're not some kind of mule that carries around stuff and sells it to people on the street, right? But this guy was trying to send the message out there to all these people that he had a book, right? And it was just a vanity press publication, right? He just said he had a story to tell, and he pasted a bunch of pictures on the thing. They made it look like a book. And so he brings these things in, and he's trying to sell them to my colleagues, and I'm sitting there just like, hey, you don't want me to get involved in this. You don't want me to get involved in this. And of course, someone hands me the book, right? And I'm just like, okay, game's on, right? So I go right to the title page, and I'm just like, you got a vanity publisher here, man. This is crap. Okay? And so I have to be the guy that brings the bad news, right? So I'm the bad guy again, right? But I have to tell them, like, look, you got, this is just paper, right? So what? It's not a book. It's just, anybody can do this. And I'm telling my colleagues, don't spend money on this guy. This guy's a snake oil salesman. Right? Who cares what his book is? It's not peer reviewed. There's nobody out there in the world who thinks it's a worthwhile story except him. Or stupid people who want to pay him money to read it. Right? You want to spend your money on crap? Go ahead and spend your money on crap. But you've got to be discerning in your ability to see things for what they are, right? You don't just read something and accept it. You have to know that it's legitimate information. And you figured out, I was reading your papers, right? You've already figured out, and then some of our best publications, the kind of research that we actually accept through publication is still crap, right? I mean, you're telling me, yeah, this stuff is not reliable. These types of arguments these people are making can't be made. And yet that stuff's out there in some of our best journals. So you can imagine, if the quality of information is really low in the published material, then the unpublished material has got to just be chaos. I didn't even want to jump into that pool, right? That's got to be a dangerous place to be. You got to be swimming around with people who've got just crazy ideas that just can't be substantiated anyway. Right? Why would you want to do that? Right? Especially in healthcare, why would you want to expose yourself to people who don't have any idea what you're talking about? Surround yourself with people who do know what they're talking about and read things from people who know what they're talking about. Websites aren't a place to be doing that, right? That's just the Wild West out there, man. Anything goes in that place. So this website that's up here, chas.com, I don't even know what that is. I just made it up when I was doing this entry. But let's pretend for today that it is something that we can use because it comes from the American Physical Therapy Association or whatever. Let's pretend that this is a legitimate website, and let's see what we can produce for an entry. Where in the book are you going to look up how to do websites? What page are you on? And don't tell me 42 because that's the basics. What pages do you go to start looking at websites? 68, thank you. All right, so get to 68 and start reading. Okay, so that's wrong. That entire entry is wrong. What I need you to do is take that information, use what you can, and build a
When you write a sentence,
website.
only the first letters come in, so like,
Do you know what a references page should look like? Go to page 78. You want to know what a reference page should look like in terms of formatting, right? It should look like this, right? The word references out there on the left-hand margin, all capped. Notice the numbers go down the left-hand margin, indented, and then everything lines up flush on that margin, right? Notice that it doesn't come on back underneath the numbers. There's no hanging indentation. There's no paragraph indentation. It's all just square, okay? Make it look like that. No parentheses there, so the period. Period. Well, all right, so an access date would be today's date, right? So you can know that. Hey, I see that there's a few papers missing from the safe assign, so make sure you get your papers up there and safe assign. If anybody discuss. You want to? You are.
I think you would say that and then website.
Okay, yeah, right, so now, where'd you get that from? So where'd you get that from?
Like homepage?
Oh, right here.
Yeah.
Yeah. Like capital W and
Yeah.
Sure, and then number 3, right, the CDC website.
Yeah, that's
Oh,
Capitalized website titles? Hmm? What? No, not the URL, you capitalize the title.
the W
Why do
and
you-
Y, but then.
Right, second style capitalization on website titles. Which one? Yeah, this one, this one, last name, first name. This is all wrong.
Yeah.
So you need to correct.
It's supposed to be the title. Oh, that's supposed to be.
All right, anybody have it written so we can put it up in critique? That done? Yeah, you get it. Okay, so this is pretty much all you can do with this one. Now, there's a problem here with this little half parentheses, right? No half parentheses on your numbering system. So Landshire space P, period. The P is here not because this is an abbreviation, but because you're ending the authors, right? There's no comma after Landshire, it's just one space. One space after the period. Why we need direct access, and why is that sentence style capitalization? Because that's the way you do it in websites, right? The Association of American Physical Therapists website, where'd you come up with that? What part of the entry did you use? What rule are you following to determine this section?
Found it on page 68.
That's right, an example. You can say, look, this is what they did in the example. They took the organization's name and put website on it, and that's exactly what you should do, right? Some critical thinking here. I know what the organization is. I know the CDC is an organization. So I can look at number 3 and I can say, hey, there's the Center for Disease Control website. They did the same thing. I'll do the same thing, right? And then the web address, which is www, whatever that, and then the access date, which is today's date, because that's about the only thing you can do. If there was an update date on the web page and a publication date, that'd be great. If you had those, you put them in. If you don't have them, you don't put them in. Question?
So you put the access date and the update date, or just?
Yep. Yeah, I would put the access date, update date, publication date, put them all 3 of them in there if you got them. Okay, good. That's pretty easy. That's straightforward, right? But now things are going to get a little bit trickier, right? So take a look at number 2. You got to figure out what it is, first of all. And then There's a whole bunch of different rules and a bunch of different presentation issues in here, so let's just follow the simple principle, right? Don't copy what's up there. Don't copy what you would find in on your article or something else. You do what the book tells you to do. Don't write anything unless you can justify what you're doing in the book. Well, you can find somewhere on that website that will tell you. And that's why I'm saying the access date is important. So I would know that if I look at the access date, let's say you accessed it today, March 7th. Then I look at the website and I see that they updated it on March 10th. No, okay, well, the information changed. So I can go on and hunt and find it because I'm sure it's still there, right? Or I can come to the next There's no way you're looking at journals already. No way. How did you get that far? Richard? Did you see this thing? All right. This is a problem, right? We're just copying information out of the book. How did you know to do this? Tell me what rule you followed to write that. But what is that? What's going on with that? What are some couple of issues that you see in there that don't make sense, that could be little traps and problems? The colon, what's that colon indicate? There's a subtitle. So there's a title and subtitle rule. You need to go look up titles and subtitles before you write anything, right? What else is a problem up there?
Nothing.
What do you think could be another issue controlled by rules of the AMA? The abbreviation, DEG, what's that? Do you know how to do abbreviations? Did you look up abbreviations? Well, then don't write anything until you look up those rules. Right? That's what I'm talking about. Don't just copy what you see from your articles or from some bibliographic page, right? You go through and question everything. Don't do anything unless the book tells you to do it. So how do you do titles and subtitles? Anybody find that page? Someone find the page of titles and subtitles in the book and tell me what page you're on and tell me what section and subsection you're in and read that. Okay, 40 what? 46, and what's the section? 3.9 for that. And what does it tell you to do? What's the pertinent part of the rule? Okay, so retain the spelling style for numbers and abbreviations in the original. All right, well, that's going to be a problem because you need to go look up abbreviations, right? So we need to go look up abbreviations. We still don't know what's the rule for how we write titles and subtitles. Where is that? 47, what section are you in? 310, what does it say? Uh-oh, subtitle begins with a lowercase letter. So it follows the same rule for titles, except the subtitle begins with a lowercase letter. Now, you've got yourself a problem, right? Because you know the first word after the colon is supposed to be lowercase, but this is an abbreviation. How do you manage that? Go look up how to do abbreviations. Not in 3.9. Go find abbreviations. While you're just looking into that, I'll get back to a few papers that I've got done. Anna Miller, Samantha Garcia, Lauren, Elizabeth Battaglia, Katie, Vanessa Sherman, Alexandra, Tatiana, Kim Brace, where are you, Kim? Kim not here today? Lisa Schmidt, you here? Emily Bush, here. Cortez Soul, here. Okay, that's all I got. I'll get the rest of them for Friday. Don't look at those now, you need to be doing this. So what's the rule? Where are you? You find it? What section are you in? All right, two. Wait, you can say that louder so we can hear it.
On page 12.
On page 12. What section? 2.1.5. And what's the rule? What is a pertinent component of this rule that we need to discuss or follow? Oh, yeah, what?
Avoid using abbreviations in the title and subtitle.
Avoid using abbreviations in the title and subtitle unless
Considerations require an exception.
okay, space, we don't have to worry about that because you've got all the paper in the world, right? Sorry, so space isn't a problem. So what could be another reason why we wouldn't do it?
Unless the title or subtitle includes the name of a group that is best known by its acronym.
Ooh, unless it's best known by its acronym. So what's best known by its acronym? How do we know what that is? What's DEG? Do you know what DEG stands for? Does anybody in here know what DEG stands for? Is it best known as DEG? Now you can't know because I made it up, right? Okay, so if you don't know what it means, then you're going to have to write it out, right? Is that word going to be capitalized after that colon? Not unless it's a proper noun, right? So you're going to have to just create some words, which will be the only time in your reference building lives that you're going to make up something, right? What's that? They don't have the same words.
The one last name is also
Oh, so on the last name.
Yeah, Peter Snyder and Diane Olson.
Oh, I see why. That's like the first one is like that way.
Well, what's the Snyder doing up there?
Snyder could be a place name.
Snyder Peter? Some references actually do that. They use, you invert the first names and then all the rest of them you write out as, first name first.
I like that. You thought Diane was the name?
Do you know how to do two authors? Do you know how to do titles of journals? You're doing right now, right? Learning those rules, figuring that stuff out.
I was not that yet.
Nope. Nope. Unless they're proper nouns. That's the only time you're going to capitalize something in titles if it's proper nouns, or if you have an abbreviation by which that's known as the abbreviation. So what could be some abbreviations that you could use in a title? CDC, yeah, or World Health Organization, WHO, right? What else? What about DNA? ATP? Yeah, probably. HIV? Yeah, those are probably best known by their abbreviations. So those are abbreviations you could use in a title. But outside of that, probably right now. Now, here's the thing. If you are in doubt, then go on the safe side, write it out, right? So you'll never be wrong if you write it out. So, if it says avoid the use of abbreviations in titles.
Yeah, they're just written in leader signs the manual.
And then the other ones are flipped, so
Yeah, you're gonna find there's a bunch of different rules, and each type is gonna be different. So chapters and books are gonna be different than book titles. It's gonna be really confusing. That's why I'm saying, tab your book, right? Start putting little notes in your book of where all this stuff is, so that you don't have to go back and relearn this. Right? That'd be a smart thing to do. Start putting your little sticky notes in there. That. Great. Because you don't want to have to start reinventing the wheel to learn all this stuff. All right, look, we're out of time. So we need to get back to this on Friday. All right, so I appreciate your hard work and effort on this. And look, it's going to, if you take away anything from these next couple of days, learn this. This is going to be a hugely time-consuming process, right? You're going to need to set aside a good chunk of time just to do your references page correctly. So make time for it. Also, you might want to think to yourself, as you're finding research, building your references when you get it, right? And start just type them up and just put them in there. You don't have to put numbers on them or anything because you don't know what order they're going to be in. But at least start creating a file. And you just create the entries as you're going along so that you don't have to spend a day and a half with the AMA manual pouring over it later, the night before the paper is due. Just recognize that's the first thing I'm going to grade, right? If you're not following the rules, I have no reason to read your paper. So make sure you know what you're doing with this stuff.